Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's session, Transforming Compliance Management into Cost Savings. And thank you all for joining. My name is Natalie Goen, and I'm on the corporate marketing team here at Salesforce. Before we begin, I would like to cover a few quick notes about our webinar platform. Today's webinar will be available on demand after we wrap up and will be accessible through the URL that you're on now. Please note the slides will advance automatically throughout the presentation. To enlarge the slides, click the Enlarge Slides button located in the right-hand corner of your presentation window. Should you need technical assistance, click on the Help widget located on the bottom left corner of your console. We've also added some additional resources which are available through the Resources window to the right of the slides. There you can find additional related content, including demos and ebooks. And lastly, we encourage you to submit questions at any time throughout the presentation using the Ask a Question widget at the bottom of your console. We'll answer as many questions as we can at the end of this presentation. And with that, I will hand it off to Cathy to get us started.
Hi, everyone, and welcome. Besides all of the caveats you just heard, I have two more additions before we jump in. And first is a big thank you for joining us here today. We know everyone's attention and time is pulled in multiple directions. So thank you for carving out some time this afternoon to come together, talk a little bit about compliance management, talk a little bit more about cost savings so we can learn together. I also need to do the last bit of housekeeping, which is a forward-looking statement. Today, Robby and I are going to talk a lot about technology and how to solve problems with technology and the outcomes that they drive. But you should make any decisions on investments on currently available and generally available capabilities. All right. Now let's jump in with some introductions. My name is Cathy Lanning. I lead our practice of insurance industry advisors here at Salesforce. I've been with Salesforce about 2 years, and I think I have the best job in the company. Sorry to everybody else who's listening from Salesforce, but I have the most amazing role because I get to work really broadly across a lot of our partners, carriers, agents, and brokers in property and casualty here in the US, but also a little bit in Canada too, and somewhat in Latin America. So I've seen this broad view of the industry, and I get to jump in and help some of our biggest and most complex partners solve some of their most important problems. Robby, do you want to do a quick introduction?
I'd love to. Thanks, Cathy, and happy to be here. I'm probably going to borrow the term you just used. I think I've got the best job at AgentSync. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer. So I oversee all things customers, from the pre-sales team to our post-sales team and a lot of the operations and support around that. And I get the opportunity to solve problems with insurance executives every day. And I love what I do. And I'm really excited to focus with you today on one of I think the underspoken but maybe more complex areas of the insurance industry around how you maintain compliance in kind of an ever-changing environment. So happy to be here. Thanks to everybody for dialing in and for joining us today, and looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome. So Robby and I are really excited to be with you guys. And we've organized today into a little bit of a discussion. We're going to do a little bit of an exchange, right? Just so you guys can hear stories from both the Salesforce side and the AgentSync side and some of the observations we've had. But I invite all of you guys to put any questions you have into the chat. Robby and I will be able to see them. And towards the end, we'd really love to open this up and hear from the audience about what are you thinking about? What are your observations? What questions can we answer for you on the topic? So don't be shy. We'll be watching those throughout this discussion and really kind of talking about them at the end. But that doesn't mean you should wait till the end. So drop them in there as things pop up. But let's talk about cost savings. Both Salesforce and AgentSync like to start with the outcome in mind. And throughout, this whole discussion, you're going to hear us talk about a couple of big outcomes. But the one that we see a lot of our partners talking about right now is cost savings. How do I become more efficient? We'll hear, how do I become more productive? How do I take cost out of my operating model permanently? We know we have some ways that we can do that so that we can become more price competitive, so that we can invest in experience, so that we can innovate in the industry. So we're seeing this desire pretty broadly from across all of our customers. And what you're going to see is come back to this idea of cost savings throughout the discussion, because this is really one of the major benefits, like I said, that really unlocks the ability to drive other priorities through the organization on something that is maybe not the most exciting topic for a lot of folks, but one of, I'm going to argue, the most important in an insurance operation, or and this is what we're going to talk about today. And let's talk about why it's important. So these are a couple of stats that come from, the sources that you see below each of these big boxes here. But right now, we're seeing that threats to compliance and threats to security and threats to privacy are actually increasing more than ever, right? Whether it's around data and security, right? So it's almost a 700% increase in the number of phishing attacks over the past 3 years. We're seeing also a lot of companies have a lot of data. So the age of big data has been here for quite some time. The challenge we see a lot of our customers have right now is that how do I manage my silos of data? My data grew up at different rates. It grew up within the business silos. How can I democratize my data and manage my data, but at the same time in doing so, manage my risk of a security breach? At the same time, we've seen a ton of volatility in the marketplace. I always kind of joke, like, hug your insurance executives today, right? Last year was rough, and there's really no abating on that right now. And whenever there's volatility in the marketplace, that regulators are looking at what can they be doing to protect customers and protect companies' interest. And so we do see continuing privacy regulations and increasing privacy regulations over time, whether it's GDPR, CMMC, but this is going to be a big area where we've seen already pressure, and we don't believe it's going to change anytime soon. So with some of the drivers of the change, let's pivot to take a look inside kind of insurance companies. And what we see is this huge desire to really kind of create the customer 360, so the single view of the customer, but do so in a way where you have a deep understanding of what the risks are, how data can be protected, how to scale with security. And so when we go and talk with customers today, we see, hey, listen, I have a lot of data coming in. I've got changing regulations. I don't have a lot of visibility into how my data and information is being used. It could be lost or stolen. There's people reacting uncoordinated to any risks and threats. And so in the future, what I'm going to need a little bit more of is how to protect personal data. I need to make sure I don't have a breach. I need to make sure I have compliance in my operations, and sometimes with third parties, right? People who are independent contractors, right? Agents or advisors. How can I have ongoing monitoring of that data? So I have this complex ecosystem by which my data is flowing, and I need to understand how it's being used and being able to monitor the performance of it, and then making sure it's backed up and encrypted. I can't lose information, and I can't have information stolen. And at the same time, I need all of this to be really proactive. We don't want to be responding to a breach. We want to be proactive in making sure our strategy is scalable as our business grows. But also as our data needs grow, as our ecosystems grow, as our partners grow, we want to make sure that we're compliant, not just in data, but in the process to secure that data on the behalf of protecting our customer and our business operations. And so when we hear these things, here at Salesforce, we have our platform, FSC, the Financial Services Cloud, which is really a custom-built cloud solution that is targeting the exact needs of the industry. And we have a couple of native capabilities. I'm going to talk about action plans, and I'm going to talk about one more in just a quick second. But these action plans are one way to create standardized workflows that minimize exposures, right? So this is about creating action templates, so standard templates embedded into standard workflows that can also include document tracking, right? So you can start to, again, create this level of predictability in how data is being consumed and operating. When it comes to team roles, it's around being able to assign tasks to certain roles and then auto-assign them to corresponding team members. So this can become part of automation of workflows and tasks throughout those workflows. And having transparency throughout the entire process and stewardship of the process, so you can have auditability and traceability when tasks are happening, when they're aging, and when they're completed. I mentioned two capabilities. The second one is around interaction summaries here. And so with the standardized workflows, with automation, you can also use interaction summaries that can deepen a customer's relationship, but also give you a level of predictability in your distribution management. So if the entire organization or if your distribution is working in one platform where you can take structured meeting notes, you can kind of add meeting details. So this could be like who's attending, what types of communications, when is this happening? If you're capturing information that's confidential to the customer or confidential to the initiative or the project, you can mark that as confidential so that you have governance over what's happening. You can use search queries and filters to actually recall and find that information fairly broadly. And in that, you can also have the invaluable customer insights. So the notes that are being captured, you can query and pull up and aggregate so you can have insights into really what's happening. And of course, attachments, particularly in complex workflows where you might have exceptions, decisions for exceptions, being able to have spreadsheets and take notes. We love a tool called Quip because it is a collaboration tool as well, embedded into the single pane of glass. It's just a really nice way, again, to start to understand what activities are driving what outcomes, by whom and when. So that's native into the Salesforce platform, but let me actually introduce Robby more into this conversation so we can talk a little bit more about AgentSync and their approach to compliance and growth.
Thanks, Cathy. I appreciate it. Yeah, so I think one of the questions we often get is, why did you decide to focus, the mission of the company around managing compliance for the insurance industry? Feels really specific, and that actually kind of dates all the way back to the origin story of AgentSync, which I think is relevant to the conversation. I can kind of give in 30 seconds here, and then we can talk a bit more about what we've learned about ensuring that compliance and compete. So the CEO of AgentSync, Niji, and myself worked at a company called Zenefits back in the early 2010s. Zenefits is, for context, sort of a high growth brokerage model. And Zenefits hire hundreds, actually thousands of brokers in a relatively short period of time. And one of the big challenges we had was just getting people licensed and ready to sell fast enough. The company ended up getting fined for about $30 million by a series of different state departments of insurance. And it wasn't for lack of trying, on the compliance side of things. It was just that every state has different rules and regulations about how to maintain kind of compliance within those different jurisdictions, and you got to do it. And so Niji got the distinct pleasure of being nominated to fix the problem, and we ran our entire business at that brokerage on Salesforce. And so we ended up building a kind of a custom ISV app to handle our licensing needs at the market, and looking at some of the other existing solutions and determining that there wasn't really anything that was going to help us make sure that ensuring the compliance and growth never competed. We built it in-house, and you fast forward about a decade later, and we're now serving the entire industry. So since then, AgentSync has raised about $150 million in venture funding, most recently valued at $1.2 billion, and we serve over 200 customers across the insurance landscape, everything from the largest carriers across life and annuities and property and casualty to some of the smallest mom and pop brokers that have a handful of licenses that they need to manage, and everything in between with the distributors, BGAs, IMOs, FMOs. That help with distribution. So we get this really interesting perspective on how kind of that whole value chain works with compliance and distribution. And we're really excited about being able to bring this type of automation, especially now into the enterprise, into some of the biggest insurance companies in the industry, in partnership with Salesforce. So yeah, I guess just to kind of summarize the point, what we hear often from customers is that it's hard to be highly compliant and grow really fast at the same time. We experienced that at Zenefits, and what we found was that if you don't do both of those things well, then you're not going to succeed. And AgentSync is a platform, especially when tied in with Salesforce, that can help make sure that any insurance company out there can maintain sort of buttoned up, spotless compliance, drive costs down, and make sure that you're growing along the way.
I love that headline: ensure compliance and growth never compete. Because I do think sometimes when you're getting started, they feel like these things are opposite. But in fact, when you have the right technology, they're absolutely not. Robby, tell me a little bit about at the very beginning. So when you start talking to partners, when you start talking to kind of potential clients and they're coming to you with their problems, how does that sound? What are they talking to you about, and how does it kind of get started, right? How does a compliance management process, how does the development one start from the beginning?
Yeah, sure. Great question. So compliance, I kind of liken it to, IT, legal, or some of these back office functions in businesses where when you're talking about it, it's usually because something has gone wrong. And they're kind of the unsung heroes of a lot of organizations where, the only time you hear about IT is when the Wi-Fi is out, or the only time you hear about legal is when maybe something has gone wrong. We sort of see that as a pattern in compliance too. And actually, when our customers approach us, it's often not about compliance at all. It's typically something that has more to do with distribution. And when you really unpack the way to enable and automate a lot of distribution, it has so much to do with your ability to onboard new distribution partners and take them through that compliance journey, and then maintain, an ongoing relationship with your distribution partners and ensure that they're ready to sell, at any given time. And so there's typically three reasons that customers approach us, Cathy, to start the dialogue. The first one actually most commonly is around creating a great producer or agent experience. We use those terms producer and agent interchangeably, but you can think of that as maybe a carrier use case on the producer side, and as a brokerage or agency use case on the agent side. And oftentimes it's all about how do we show up in the market to our partners when we are striking up new relationships and getting those folks onboarded. And for a lot of folks, it can take 30 plus days for a new partner to raise their hand and get them ready to sell. And so much of that is caught up in the cogs of complexity within the compliance and onboarding piece. The second kind of value driver, as we call them, is around integrated, automated, and real-time compliance. Often, historically, companies have thought about compliance as sort of a one-time event where you onboard somebody, you view their paperwork, you put it in a file, and then you put it in a cabinet. And when you need to review it, you basically need to go back and do that process again and kind of like update all the information. With AgentSync, we basically take an individual's producer number, we subscribe it to NIPR, which is the National Insurance Producer Registry, and we keep your entire distribution channel up to date every single day. So the whole notion of having to have a file on somebody and go back up and review it goes away. And so many downstream systems, Cathy, depend on this ready to sell information, whether that's your policy administration system as a carrier, maybe it's your agency management system as a brokerage. A lot of these, or your commissions platform, a lot of these systems depend on a signal that says, yes, this individual was a part of this hierarchy and was licensed and appointed and ready to sell at this moment in time. Go ahead and pay the commission. It's really challenging to accomplish that for some organizations, just due to a lack of being able to be integrated. And our entire platform is kind of built on the back of Salesforce and has modern REST APIs that customers can leverage. And then the third piece is just around distribution insights. I'll take a life and annuities carrier as an example, and I think we've got some folks on the call that are representing from life and annuities companies. Oftentimes what we hear from life and annuities companies, there's 4 or 5 different unique distribution channels and where people are raising their hands to get appointed. Some of those come in through fax machines. Some of those come in through phone calls. Some of those come in through like a website portal. And then some come through technology partners like DTC Suralcy. And getting all of those hand raisers who want to get appointed into one single platform is actually quite challenging. That's one of the big value propositions that AgentSync brings, is being able to consolidate all of those onboarding requests into one single place, built on the back of Salesforce, and then designed to be the platform for ongoing management of your distribution channel going forward. So to summarize, producer experience, integrated compliance, and distribution channel insights are typically the 3 reasons why someone would raise their hand to start a conversation about compliance.
That was amazing. I hear super similar, and the only thing I would add on to, and it's specific to your kind of agent experience, whenever we're talking, so many of our partners are really looking to drive strong growth right now, strong, profitable growth. And they know that part of that is through new appointments, right? Bringing on new sellers. And they know that first 30 days of that relationship through that appointment process, right? Getting ready to sell is the most critical 30 days to setting the tone for the relationship. And if they can get someone through that easily, simply, and fast, it sets the tone for what to expect with everything yet to come, right? When it comes to the selling relationship. And so it allows them to move someone from kind of appointed to ready to sell to first sale to selling more, selling and then selling more and more things, right? So to persistency and the diversification. And they know that they can't get all the way to that diversified selling experience if they can't get these first 30 days right. So I think you guys, there's just such a valuable value proposition that AgentSync kind of lands right there.
Yeah, well said. And I think one of the other big themes we see on the back of that, Cathy, is just there's kind of this trend about the, aging broker population. And I use sort of air quotes because I think you look at, there's a number of different sources that kind of quote the average age of insurance broker anywhere from 45 to 65 or somewhere in the middle. But I think the key point is that there's a new wave of kind of the next generation, right, of distributors and brokers and agents that are coming onto the scene, and their expectations of what it means to work directly with a carrier are different, in terms of what does it mean to get started, to get ready to sell, to get sort of access to products, to get paid my commission, to sort of go on down that value chain and start the relationship. And we're hearing that from a lot of customers as something where they want to make investments, make sure that they're ready, for that generational shift that seems.
Yeah, that's a great point. The behaviors of how the producers of the future, the agents of the future want to operate is remarkably different in digital first, right? And so to lean in with a digital first solution from the very beginning sets the tone. I wanted to ask you, one of the other common things I hear with our clients is around, hey, I've got legacy systems. And I kind of mentioned this in the opening, silos, legacy systems. Do you have any scenarios or kind of experiences or customer stories where you had to manage through kind of creating that 360 view of the customer, right? Where someone was able to see kind of, and by customer here, I mean the agent, right? Or the producer. So do you have any stories where you've had those experiences with some of your partners, and how'd you manage through that?
Yeah. I think the truth is, if you want to work in the insurance industry as a technology vendor and serve this community and this industry of experts and folks, like, you need to be ready and prepared to interface with some legacy systems. I mean, one of the coolest things about insurance is this is one of the most durable industries like the world has ever seen. I mean, the insurance industry is going to endure more sort of financial recessions than any of us will in our entire careers. Many of the companies that operate in our space have been around for well over 100 years. And, any company that's been around that long is going to have some legacy technology stacks that are core systems of record and sources of truth that need to be considered when you think about making any type of technology transformation or change. So when we designed this product, it was all about flexibility in terms of how we deliver value, right? And not thinking about the delivery of AgentSync as this big bang implementation where you're, ripping out a core system and doing a multi-year implementation, but instead thinking about ways that we can deliver phased value for our customers over time. And one of the first couple areas, Cathy, that we typically see that playing out is we actually leverage Salesforce's communities page, and we build out basically a web portal where distribution partners, so agents and agencies, can interface directly and raise their hand to kind of get new folks appointed directly, for example, with a carrier. And the backbone of that technology is Salesforce. It's highly configurable. We design it to be the branding and logo and identity of the customer and create an experience. And that's typically something that a customer will do with us in the first 30 days of signing on board. And it's a pretty easy low lift. Then from there, it's all about kind of unpacking all of those back-end systems that rely on that ready to sell signal. We spend a lot of time with large insurance companies where from the very first step of onboarding to every downstream system has been told this individual is ready to sell. It's this massive cobweb of complex work streams and workflows to tell every single constituent, or technology in the business that, yeah, this individual is ready to sell. And we can kind of pick apart areas that can instantly be automated along that way, eventually making the entire process automated. So, long way of saying, I think if you want to play in this space, if you want to serve enterprise insurance businesses as a technology vendor, you need to be prepared to work with and excited to work with some legacy technology systems, because that's just the truth of our industry. We've been around for a long time, and you're going to run into that.
Yeah. I mean, I really think, this industry is the original source of kind of where data became a product, right? If you think about it, at the core, It's about capital, data, and regulation, right? And we're hitting on two of those three pillars today, right? Which is how do we manage data, which has been managed inside these insurance companies for many decades. This is not new. This is the product effectively. And then, how do you do so in a compliant way? So two of the three cores of this industry are kind of addressed in the solutions we're chatting about. Can we talk about scale? Sometimes when I talk to partners, they're a little bit curious about, I have a lot of agents and advisors and producers, right? How does this solution work at scale? Are there limitations? How do I meet maybe segments of agents and their unique understanding and their unique needs? And then the other part of scale is, how do I transition my internal employees, right? They've been doing it one way for so long. So can you just talk a little bit about kind of the scale and what that means from an agent perspective or a producer perspective, but then also what does the solution mean for an internal employee who might be doing something that they know well, but just in a different way?
Yeah, no, great questions. I'll start with, the technology part of the question. And one of the core reasons, Cathy, we decided to build this product on Salesforce, on force.com from day one, was because we knew that scale was going to be important. And there really is not a better enterprise platform out there from a technology standpoint to build technology on for scale than Salesforce. From day one, our customers were able to enjoy a massive network of connected applications via the App Exchange, where they could configure the entire onboarding experience, plug in things like DocuSign and background check vendors and all of those steps through existing ISV partners that Salesforce already works with, not to mention all of the security and the API infrastructure that's offered out of the box, building on Salesforce. So we've always pointed to that as one of the more important things, design decisions we made on our product for our customers from day one. The other really interesting thing that we found is that the bigger the customer, the more complex the distribution network is typically. And the more complex the distribution network, the more pain and the more cost typically going into what you would consider a compliance or onboarding practice within that insurance entity. And so, if you take, I'll go back to that life and annuities carrier example I gave in the beginning, you might have 150,000 unique relationships with brokerages, agencies, broker dealers, and agents that live in a bunch of disparate systems today. You might have a call center where you've got active agents who are taking inbound calls for prospective buyers that are calling in, and a series of other different distribution relationships, and no central pane of glass where you can get visibility into that entire distribution channel. And so I think that's really the one of the biggest areas of value unlock that I think has been focused on, is creating that single pane of glass for all of your distribution. And what we found is that the more scaled, the bigger the customer, the more value there is to them in centralizing that view into one place and centralizing those work streams into one place. And one place that can feed into all of your other downstream systems, like, for example, your FSC instance in Salesforce that might rely on that ready to sell information. So when we think about scale, we think that is where we're exceptionally well positioned because of the product being built on Salesforce, and that's where we typically find the most interesting problems to solve in our industries and sort of the most scaled customers. And I think to your point about the transition from one way to sort of doing work another way, I think that's all about how do you appreciate and respect the subject matter expertise of the individuals who are going to be leveraging your technology. And one of the things we love most about serving the compliance, the compliance teams in the insurance industry is that so much of this state-to-state complexity of how compliance works lives up here for the entire industry. There's subject matter experts that work in these insurance companies that understand at a very granular level every single detail of these state rules and regulations, and helping them understand and see that AgentSync has built all of those considerations into the product and creating more leverage for those individuals to go out and make a bigger value add and a bigger impact within the company is one of the ways where we've seen a lot of folks that were maybe originally skeptics about shifting from spreadsheet to technology become really strong champions, and hand raisers to be a part of our community of change agents across the industry that are really leaning in. And Salesforce does an amazing job with this, with the Trailblazers community and everything you guys do. So I think it's all about, showing the value and showing a path to kind of growth for your users.
Yeah. I love that. And we've seen when it comes to adoption that Trailhead does a really great job of with the reskilling component of it, but also the engagement component of it. We did a major transformation in a large insurance company recently and made it kind of part of the fun, right? So there's through the badges and through the ability, custom trails, people kind of got a little bit addicted to the confetti at the end of kind of going through one of the modules. And so the gamification of it all made it a bit fun, but I also think it built team and camaraderie because the whole organization was really moving through it together. So change management is always tough. But there are some of these key tools that make it a little bit easier and a little bit better. All right, last question, and then we had a couple come in through the chat that I want to pivot to. And team listening, as you guys are hearing this conversation, please feel free to add more into the chat. But you started to talk a little bit towards the end about value. And I started this, kind of kicked us off talking about the outcome of cost savings, right? So starting with the outcomes in mind, we know cost savings is one of them, but can you talk a little bit more and unpack how those cost savings are realized in your experience, and what are some of the other outcomes you see, when there's a successful implementation with AgentSync and Salesforce?
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe I can just give it an actual customer example of a customer today who's one of the top health insurance technology companies was facing kind of some of these exact challenges, Cathy, where they were scaling and their cost structure was scaling linearly with kind of their distribution, where the bigger they got, the more expensive it was to kind of run this practice of expanding distribution. This customer, and I'll save their name out of sort of respect for them, but they work in kind of medical and Medicare side of things as a brokerage. They were transacting all these licenses and appointments and maintaining data on all of their producers manually. And they were using a bunch of manual reports to maintain compliance across a series of different systems. We typically see this where there's a series of point solutions, spreadsheets, and sort of like paper files that ultimately make up, a distribution management practice. This brokerage came on board with both Salesforce and Agent around the same time, with kind of two goals in mind: continuing to expand distribution while driving down cost. And I think it was pretty fun to watch this, where over 50% of the team that was focused all day long on keying in information into spreadsheets and then updating that information in spreadsheets on nearly like a weekly basis was freed up and actually shifted their focus much more onto the enablement, the sales enablement of all of those producers that they were bringing into the business to sell their products. And so they got this kind of dual lift where 50% of that team's time and cost was alleviated from managing this practice. And they saw this really big lift in productivity from all of these new agents that they were hiring on board, because they were able to shift all this focus towards, kind of a true sales enablement practice. And we see this as a pretty common pattern. And in the end, the customer was able to save something around 60% of the entire cost basis of running this compliance program, and they created a lot more control as they scale around managing the cost of this practice. And they did all of this while growing to be one of the top 25 agencies in the entire industry. So, again, going back to making sure that compliance and growth don't compete, it was a great example. And we see this a lot where customers are leveraging Salesforce and AgentSync together to help make sure that they're accomplishing both.
Outstanding. Now I have a couple that are coming in, and I love that a success story, by the way. I mean, just the outcomes are extraordinary. All right. Sarah is asking, hey, Robby, you mentioned earlier the communities page. So can you talk a little bit more about what that looked like and how kind of producers and agents were interacting with it? Maybe some of the outcomes from that communities page? And thanks for the question, Sarah.
Yeah, you got it. Yeah. So the communities technology is a really fun corner of Salesforce that, the end user doesn't necessarily see it as a Salesforce communities page. That's the backend technology that AgentSync is leveraging so that our customers can create a web portal that's typically on a website or sent as a direct URL link when people raise their hands to get appointed with a carrier, for example. And it's a really nice workflow tool where you can design and customize the brand, the look, and the feel. And you might take what is today a 30-page PDF document and a series of back and forth emails with an individual asking questions to get them ready to sell and consolidate them into like a series of really well-refined steps in one of those communities pages that basically takes you from raising your hand all the way through requesting an appointment. And then those producers can go revisit that page to sort of see the status of their appointment request and getting them to sell. One of the consistent patterns that we see, and actually a good story on this, where I was talking to one of the top 5 PNC. I was on site with them pretty recently, and they were telling me a story about one of their broker partners that was telling them, it's taken us a really long time to get appointed with you guys. They showed them this really simple time scale. On the left side of the axis was shortest time to appoint, and on the right side of the axis was the longest time to appoint. And this carrier was dead last on the right side of that axis, 50 days from this brokerage raising their hand to get a new seller appointed to they're ready to sell. And the cool thing that we saw was on the left side, there were 3 carriers that were all sub 5 days from hand raised to ready to sell. All of them were agent customers. So we see this consistent pattern where the carriers that are able to create the best producer experiences and get individuals ready to sell fastest, the agencies that are able to create the best agent experiences and get those agents ready to sell fastest are using AgentSync. And that web portal is a really powerful tool to collect all of that private and necessary PII to get that individual through all of the IPR credentialing and get them ready to sell quickly. There's a bunch of cool examples too that you can find as you kind of click around in the industry and try to get appointed. If you look for it, you'll see AgentSync kind of planted across hundreds of customers.
I love it. I love it. Here's one more. Talking about, apart from Niper, what other out-of-box integrations do we have on AgentSync, right? So there are like Limra and others.
Yeah. So great question. Looks like Shyam asked that. Pretty much everything listed. So when we think about kind of compliance and onboarding and ready to sell, we think about every single step that is required and encapsulated in that process, from someone raising their hand to somebody in the field buying a policy and getting paid that first commission, that critical moment that sort of engenders that loyalty and creates a really high producing performer for years to come. So that's everything from the NIPR integration for folks that work in the annuities space, integration with FINRA and being able to check those broker credentials, as well as DTCC through background checks. So we integrate directly with a handful of the premier background check vendors in the space. And for any that we don't, we have a pretty easy path to getting new background check providers. That includes things like Vector One and Limra as well. So when we think about that compliance process end to end, we think about everything it touches, and that also includes things like e-signature, typically signing producer agreements or signing commission agreements along the way. So the approach that AgentSync takes is we're very unopinionated about the technology stack that you're currently using. Instead, leveraging a lot of the power of Salesforce, we have an agnostic platform that's able to intake the current vendors that you're using. And if you're on the market for a new vendor, we'll introduce you to a partner, no problem. But you can also sort of bring your own partners, and we can build that into the work stream of your onboarding solution.
Amazing. 2 more quick questions here. This one is really around almost like the flexibility of the tool. So when it comes to the ready to sell determination, is it possible to configure the ready to sell rules based off of how a carrier is interpreting, what compliance means?
Yeah, this is one of those questions where you could pull up a chair and kind of unpack this one for a couple hours if you had the time. We don't today, so I'll give a quick answer on it. But I would love to unpack this, a little bit further in the future. Absolutely, there's certain hard and fast truths as it relates to state by state compliance, things that are non-negotiable. But depending on the carrier, depending on the line of business, the products that they're in, depending on their distribution strategy, there are gray areas. And those gray areas are left to interpretation by the carrier, by the provider, by the state in some cases. And so the way we approach this is we have 250 industry experts that work at this company, that many of whom have been, running the compliance practice for the largest agencies and largest carriers in our industry for years. Subject matter experts that are now product managers that work here at AgentSync. And so our perspective is, we provide you with our perspective, and we provide you with a product that allows you to execute against that perspective, but we give you the configurability and flexibility to build in your own rules, your own regulations, the things that are currently baked into your configurability out of the box that comes with Salesforce.
Amazing. Hey, when it comes to explaining the relationship between AgentSync and Salesforce, is AgentSync built on the Salesforce infrastructure, separate platform, or tightly integrated? It is built on the Salesforce platform, which is part of the beauty of this partnership. And we have many like this, actually, where we just have kind of open citizens developers that are able to build straight onto the platform. But I'd love to offer this one up to Robby to talk a little bit more about kind of the relationship and how you guys got started.
Yeah, you nailed it, Kathy. So, one of the cool things about AgentSync is that you don't have to be a Salesforce customer to use it, but there's certainly a lot of additional value that those that are using sort of Salesforce as an embedded core platform of their insurance practice get from using both AgentSync and Salesforce together. And there's a lot that goes into that, and I think it's highly dependent on the customer and their specific industry practice and the seat that they sit in within the industry. But Kathy nailed it. AgentSync is built on Salesforce. When we deploy the solution, you're getting an instance of Salesforce, or you can embed it into your current instance of Salesforce. So there's flexibility around how it's deployed. We typically do it based on what best serves the customer. And there's a very tight integration where you can pass data back and forth or host all the data kind of within the existing within one Salesforce instance. So in doing that, you're able to create an incredibly strong view, really a 360-degree view of your entire distribution channel, every relationship that matters to you, and a really clear signal about where those individuals are sort of ready to sell, all while kind of having a best-in-class compliance practice running on the end without the need for a massive organization to staff it.
Yeah. Excellent. All right, last question, guys. And so if there's any others out there, bring them on. But do you pull data from SureLC? Are you familiar with SureLC?
So this is, I sure am. So SureLC is a carrier contracting tool that a lot of the BGAs in the life and annuity space will do to request many carrier appointments all at once. And it basically gets delivered to the carrier in the form of a file, which is basically, packaging up a bunch of carrier request forms all at once. So yes, we have experience ingesting and supporting these types of files, and it's a pretty standard requirement of just about every life and annuity carrier out there, and something that we're really familiar with in terms of how we support it and how we make sure that that component of your distribution channel is just one of many that fits into your entire sort of distribution practice. So yeah, lots of experience with how we do that, and the ingest pattern that we use basically in those SureLC files to basically get people appointed quickly.
Amazing. All right, last one that came in, and then we can kind of move to closing comments and closing thoughts. But how integrated does AgentSync address onboarding and licensing within one unified workflow?
Yeah, great question. We think of AgentSync as, oftentimes the onboarding process is what we call single threaded, meaning one thing has to happen before the next thing can begin. And that's often what causes so many companies to take weeks or months to get someone from raising their hand to ready to sell. The way that AgentSync thinks about this is more multi-threaded, where you can run multiple processes all at once and compress the amount of time it takes an individual ready to sell. So we think of onboarding as sort of the holistic approach of every step, and licensing as being one of those steps that has to happen along the way. So is a background check. So is a Vector 1 check. So are a number of these other things that all have to happen in unison. And you can run these as parallel processes that all happen at the same time instantly and drive down the number of days it's for you to onboard agents. And, in doing that, if you can give an agent an extra 30 days of selling time every year, you think about, the average agent writes maybe 4, 5, 6 policies depending on the carrier per year. And you're onboarding an extra 40,000 agents per year if you're one of the larger carriers out there. It really starts to add up in terms of additional revenue. So long story short, it's a unified workflow, but we think of it more in the context of a multi-threaded workflow as opposed to a single-threaded workflow where you can run parallel processes to ultimately drive down the cost for how long it's taking you to get individuals onboarded.
Amazing. Well, let's do closing comments. I want to thank everybody who submitted questions. Those were fabulous and gave us a really great chance to get a sense of what's important to you as you listen and where additional information would be helpful. So thanks for submitting those, guys. As we kind of close up here, I just wanted to kind of offer maybe some closing thoughts, and I'll start because you've been doing a lot of talking, Robby, and then we'll pass it back to you and like closing comments. But, I really hope that, you got a really good sense from this conversation about the thoroughness, the thoughtfulness, the completeness, and the amazing performance of this solution. We have the chance to work, our team has had the chance to work together on solving some of these big compliance problems with some of our key partners. And there always has been positive feedback that comes back. And so I just want to thank, the AgentSync team for being such amazing partners with this solution. How it integrates within the Salesforce platform for end-to-end distribution management is really an execution of excellence. And when we think about the outcomes from distribution management, and compliance and data and security and managing volatility while trying to grow, I think that, as you're listening and reflecting on what that takes to do so at scale and throughout the organization, there really is a nice end-to-end solution between FSC, so the Financial Services Cloud, but with AgentSync really working in that front end to drive performance from day one. So, Robby, what are your thoughts?
I'm just excited. I think we've been hard at work for the past decade, really, like I mentioned earlier, serving the smallest mom and pop brokerages all the way up to the largest carriers and everything in between. Within this kind of Salesforce ecosystem, Salesforce has been making a ton of progress as well. And you're really starting to see some of these digital transformation projects that were built on the back of AgentSync and Salesforce years ago, hitting the market and sort of reaching full value realization. And it's really powerful. And so I wanted to thank the audience for all the great questions today. I think that there's pretty much universal agreement that getting folks onboarded and ready to sell is harder than it should be. And we're excited about the corner of the industry that we're supporting, in partnership with Salesforce to help make it easier to distribute insurance in our industries and do it all in the spirit really of driving down costs in a pretty permanent way, especially in this market climate. So, Cathy, I just wanted to say thank you again for being such a wonderful host, to the Salesforce team for making this such an easy experience, and really to the audience for asking a ton of really thoughtful questions.
Yes, absolutely. And as we part, guys, I just wanted to share this kind of end card where you can find some additional resources. So, of course, you can find both Robby and I on LinkedIn. Always happy to exchange and kind of offer more information that way. But there's some QR codes that just give you a little bit more insight into some exclusive content that's coming through our I Love Insurance forums. A great article from AgentSync on 10 ways carriers can make compliance a cost saver. And then, of course, we have our State of Service report, which is something we do annually from Salesforce. So there's some really interesting perspectives from executives across the globe on what service operations look like in financial services and what great looks like. So check these out. And of course, the AgentSync website there for more information, guys. So check these out. Don't be strangers. Thanks for joining us today. Really appreciate all the engagement. Have a great one.